Welcome everyone to my how-to video on completing assignment 7058. So this will actually be the first of two videos because you're creating two documents in this assignment. So this video is going to give you an overview of the entire assignment and focus specifically on the perception and execution memo. Okay, so to find out more about this assignment, we want to scroll down in our course Moodle and you can find most of the content for this under week 7. So here is our submission deadline here. So make sure you submit everything complete in one Word document by the deadline. And you see that I've got a couple of templates for you that I will be using in this tutorial. All right, so I want to find out what the assignment is and what I have to do. So in the overview of the week, all you have to do is click on this 7058 link here, and it will open up the wiki page that gives us our assignment prompt. Okay, so we have a very brief email from Alex Nostrovia assigning us to do this work. Tells us our learning objectives, and I'm going to be focusing on the tasks. So you are creating two documents overall for 7058. You should, of course, begin with a title page, and then after that will be a memo to Alex Nostrovia in which you talk about perception and execution, and then a second memo, again to Alex Nostrovia, in which you talk about interpreting. So this video is going to be focusing on task number 1. My other video will be focusing on interpreting. Okay, so all three of these things should be in one Word document when you submit them to Moodle. So in one Word document, you should have a title page, then your memo on perception and execution, and then your memo on interpreting. Okay, so I'm going to be focusing on task number 1 right now. So I know I need to write a memo, and at this point, this should look very familiar to me. So it should be in memo format. It should be from me to Alex Nostrovia. But I need to know what the perception and execution challenges are. So if you'll notice, both of these tasks have you reflect on your SWOT report or the process of writing and revising your SWOT report. So I know right away that my evidence and examples should come from my SWOT report or the peer response request memo. Okay, so I know that as I read these pages, I should be thinking about how they relate to my experience writing my SWOT report. So I'm going to open up both of these pages, beginning with perception. So this is another page in the wiki, and it basically explains that how you, the writer, perceive the content of what you've written may be very different from how your target audience perceives it. So the example here I think is pretty cool. From one perception, one perspective, this rock seems pretty big. But from another perspective, this is the same rock and it doesn't look so big. So that's a very simple way of thinking about the challenge of perception. The way you, the writer, perceive your SWOT report or your arguments or how good your evidence is may be very different than how your target audience perceives it. And so, of course, to overcome this challenge, we have to think from our target audience's perspective because they're the ones we're trying to convince. Okay, so that's basically the perception challenge. Okay, how do you make your perspective match how your target audience views your writing so that you can be more effective in affecting your reader and getting them to perform your desired consequence? So in the SWOT report, you are trying to make a recommendation to a local business, trying to get them to, take on a project for the next year that would improve their business in the way that you think would give them the best chance. Okay, and so this is already a perception challenge because you think this is the best way, but we don't know if the target audience thinks that your recommendation is the best way. Okay, so we have to think about what our target audience values, what they care about, what their focus is, what their identity for the business is, and then try to adapt our recommendation to that perspective. Okay, so that's just some general thoughts about how the challenge of perception relates to the SWOT report. You also have to cover the challenge of execution in this memo. So to get to this page, you can just click, so this is our assignment prompt, and under task 1, click on the execution challenge, and this page in the wiki will pop up. So the execution challenge, basically, this page explains that. So think of it this way. You could have a perfect plan. You could have already overcome the perception challenge. You could have been thinking from your target audience's perspective and come up with arguments and evidence that you think that they would value. But something in the execution of your plan is not having the desired effect. Okay. And so this really relates to revision and peer review a lot because it's really difficult to identify from our own perspective what is working and what is not. Okay, so that's the execution challenge. Okay, something about your attempt to accomplish your desired consequence is not being effective on your target audience. And so you have to basically assume everything you've done isn't working and then try to come up with better ways or different ways of accomplishing the same desired consequence and trying those out on different people and seeing which one maybe has the best chance from all of those perspectives. So you're starting to hear how I'm integrating these two concepts with each other because they're very related, and that's why they are part of the same memo. So feel free to take some more time to think about these, maybe even free write about what you think they mean. So my perception of what these concepts mean may be a little different from your perception of what these concepts mean. So spend some time getting a really solid idea for yourself what you think these concepts mean and how you think they relate to your experience in writing the SWOT report. Okay, and once you think you have some good ideas of what these challenges are, why they matter, now you're probably ready to start writing. So I'm going to go back to our course Moodle page, and this is under week 7. And here you'll see a template for 7058 perception and execution memo. So if you open that up, I've basically outlined a structure for you. And here it is. So we have our memo structure, our format, okay? You are writing this to Alex and Strovia. This is from you, so your full name should be in this line. And this should be the date you wrote this document. And then have an appropriate RE line. So remember that this memo is in response to a request from Alex. So I've made this an RE line instead of a subject line. Okay, so once you've got your format set up, now you're ready to start writing. Now notice that I have an opening. So here's our opening, here's our middle, our body paragraphs, and here's our closing paragraph. Now the reason why I've broken it up this way instead of just having it as one big paragraph is that we are covering 2 points. And so since we're covering 2 different topics, we really need to break those up into 2 different body paragraphs. And if we have 2 different body paragraphs or more, that probably deserves an opening paragraph. And then to put those concepts together and figure out why they matter together, then you need a closing paragraph. So that's why you'll see that this memo has multiple paragraphs. Okay, so in your opening, you can do this in one sentence. You could simply have your thesis. How are both challenges regarding perception and execution relevant to the process you experienced in writing the SWOT report? So a thesis is just like answering a question that encompasses all of your content. Now, I would highly recommend drafting this last because it's a lot easier to introduce content that exists that you've already written than it is to introduce content that doesn't exist yet, that you haven't written yet. But basically what a thesis does is puts all of the content together and introduces the overall idea. And so a thesis is also, like a premise, an answer to a question. You're just answering a question about all of the content, whereas in a premise, you're answering a question about a single topic. Okay, so this is the way I've interpreted the overall purpose of this memo. Now, if you think the overall purpose is different, you can answer a different question than this. That is totally fine. But this is just to give you an idea of how the structure should work. So answer a question in your thesis that encompasses the entire document, and that answer is your thesis. And so you can just write a single sentence and be done with your opening. If you want, so this is a reflection, so it is appropriate to use first person I. And if you want to, you can add a couple of sentences expressing this overall idea further. So if you want to give me a little bit more context, that's the opening is a good place to do that. However, if you feel like your thesis is sufficient on its own, you can just leave this as one sentence. Okay, so next we have our body paragraphs. And again, I would recommend that you draft these first. So for each topic, it has its own body paragraph and it follows the Peck order of premise, evidence, and concluding sentence. So all of these parts go in one paragraph. So the first thing you should do is answer the question about this topic alone. How was the perception challenge relevant to writing your SWOT? And by writing, I mean, you could interpret this as meaning the entire process of writing the SWOT. So it could be part of your brainstorming and research and drafting and peer review and revisions and all of that stuff. So any point that perception became relevant in writing your SWOT. So you can talk about any of that stuff. So again, like a thesis, it's really hard to write a premise before you know what you are introducing. So you might draft your premise after you've written your evidence, okay? So what you will need to do to prove your premise is cite 2 to 3 specific examples of when you realized your perception and your target audience perception was different. And so obviously places in peer review and revision are obvious places for this, but you may have had these realizations during brainstorming or drafting. It could be at any point. So describe to me using show don't tell, use descriptive language, 2 to 3 specific examples of where you realized your perception of the content or the purpose of the document was different than what you realized your target audience would see. And then, how did this realization alter your writing process? So answer this question for each example. So you should say, I first realized my perception was different from my target's audience during the research phase when I did X, Y, and Z. And I realized that my target audience would see it this way. So as a result, I changed what? Okay, so what did you change once you had this realization? Okay, so do that a couple of times, 2 to 3 times, and then once you have your evidence down, now it's a lot easier to identify an overall idea. Okay, now it's a good time to answer this question and put your answer before the evidence. Okay, finally, the last sentence of your body paragraph should be the concluding thought. And so this is where you connect this topic to your overall purpose of the document. And so if you haven't caught on yet, the purpose of all these writing about writing assignments is to give you a space to think about your own writing process, your own, how you view writing, and to see how you can evolve your writing process and your understanding of writing. So if you're connecting this topic, perception, to the overall purpose, you're basically answering the question, how does your new understanding of perception change how you write, want to write, how you want to change your writing process, any of those versions. Okay, so basically, how does your newfound knowledge about perception change your understanding of writing or writing as a process? And so that will connect this topic to the overall purpose of how is your writing evolving? What are you learning about writing? Okay. All right. So once you're done with that, you're ready for the next body paragraph and you do the same thing, but for execution challenge. Okay. So how is the execution challenge relevant to writing your SWOT? Answer the question. Support your premise with 2 to 3 examples of when you realized your execution wasn't having the desired effect you wished it to have. So The likely places that this happened was during peer review and revision. So I want you to cite a couple of examples of when your intention wasn't being accomplished. So then, how did you change your writing as a result of realizing your execution wasn't working? Okay, so again, once you have your 2 to 3 examples and they are proving your premise, you should then have a concluding thought that connects this topic to your overall purpose. So again, very similar to the concluding thought of the previous paragraph. How does your new understanding of execution change how you write, want to write, change your process, something like that? Okay, so how does this topic change your view, understanding, or practice of writing? Okay, and then once you are done with both those body paragraphs, you're ready for a closing paragraph. Okay, and so just remember that closing paragraph addresses the question overall, what have you learned? And the easiest way to do this is to take your mini conclusions, your tiny ones, and put them together. So add them up, and what it equals together is your closing paragraph, your overall conclusion. Okay? So overall, what would be a guiding principle you'd like to take away from both of these topics? And so the stronger the closing conclusion is, will be based on how well you're able to integrate these 2 topics together. Okay, so you want to integrate these 2 topics into a single lesson for yourself. You can think of it as a rule of the day that you can take with you and put in your pocket. Okay, so I hope that this video was useful, and if so, you'll check out my next one on the memo about interpreting. Good luck.